As a human family, we've had an enormous wake-up call to how connected we are with a tiny little virus that comes along and shuts us down.
We all live in this world together. The same blood flows in me and any other person.
We're facing the challenges of an ecosystem that is stressed.
Things are not moving as fast as they should. Things are improving, but not as fast as they should.
The challenges that we are facing, they are materializing so fast that it's not only my children or grandchildren which will experience the consequences if we fail.
To do it, we need to do it together. Collaboration, north, south, east, west, black, brown, white. Strength in the diversity of the human family is what we need right now to get us past this incredibly difficult time. Might sound like it's impossible, but that's what we work towards, making the impossible possible.
20 years ago, a small group of United Nations and business leaders came up with a visionary proposal.
I propose that you, the business leaders here gathered in Davos, and we, the United Nations, initiate a global compact of shared values and principles which will give a human face to the global market.
I always say part of Kofi Annan's genius was he invited business, but he also addressed civil society and labor organizations.
The mission of the United Nations Global Compact is to mobilize companies around the world to align their operations and strategies with 10 universal principles in the areas of human rights, labor, environment, and anti-corruption.
The UN represents the body that aims to drive international cooperation and drive peace and security for humanity. And I think it unifies all of society around this set of 17 goals.
Our objectives cannot be met if the private sector doesn't play a fundamental role. And so the Global Compact is a platform in which all those businesses that abide by the principles of, and values of the United Nations and of the Charter to work together, representing the best of humankind.
For the last 2 decades, the initiative has grown to encompass local networks in more than 60 countries, engaging directly with over 10,000 companies.
The local networks are our global footprint around the world, and they work with us to translate the 10 principles as well as the Sustainable Development Goals into actionable pieces of work for businesses globally.
It is so decided.
Since 2015, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Climate Agreement have provided the most powerful common agenda that the world has ever seen, with an essential role spelled out for business.
L'accord de Paris pour le climat est accepté.
Any business that continues to operate under its own self-interest will not be around very long. So businesses that have a strong purpose, that understand how they can make society better, will be embraced by society and will be around for a long time.
Be the change that you want to see in business.
I truly believe that companies who do not put sustainability, the SDGs, in their strategies, they're going to disappear.
The mindset of consumers has changed. They increasingly want to buy from companies that are contributing to society as a whole.
Business must be part of the solution in when we address these big global problems.
The focus has shifted to both the short term and the long term, both doing well and doing good, making profits and making a change. This is a reality of the world now. Leaders need to lead sustainably.
The United Nations Global Compact is leading the transformation ahead, challenging companies to take more ambitious action on the Sustainable Development Goals.
I think it's absolutely impossible to face the challenges of today, the very quick change that is happening, without having the youth leading the way and helping us define the right strategies, the right policies, the right approaches to address the global problems.
The world is waking up, and change is coming whether you like it or not.
Climate justice! Now! Climate justice! Our planet's not for profit!
The world today has got more opportunities than it has the challenges that can be overcome by the opportunities that we have.
You find people in the most desperate of situations, determined to fight for a better future. That's the kind of world I want.
What has changed in a very short period of time is that the narrative is different, and that is fantastic.
If you want to have a good business, you have to mobilize people. A business is a sum of people working to something.
More and more people realize that sustainability is really about making the pie bigger, better, and more inclusive.
I hope in the future all businesses in the world will think about their own purpose. Business can only exist when they have a purpose.
We've got to show progress. We've got to reverse what's happening.
I see the Global Compact as an incredible organization working together with businesses to build a more sustainable world.
We are united across the globe, for the globe. We're united despite our challenges, no matter how daunting the task may seem. We are united by possibilities because this is bigger than one business, because we are better together. We all have the same job. We are united in the business of a better world.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome to the Uniting Business Africa 2021. My name is Yvonne Okwara and I'm honored to be your MC for this exciting event today. Now, hosted by the UN Global Compact, Uniting Business Africa brings together African and global leaders from various spheres, such as business, civil society, government, and the all-important Global Compact local networks who are so instrumental in building the sustainability agenda at the grassroots level, as well as the United Nations, all of whom are working together to strengthen responsible business practices, and of course, working together towards the realization of the Sustainable Development Goals and the Africa Union Agenda 2063. So we have a great event for you today, a wide variety of sessions. We have prepared for you presentations. We've got panels with industry leaders, and we've also got some exclusive network opportunities for you here today. So we know we're in the middle of a pandemic, and we have tried to make this experience as great and as interactive as if we were all in the same room, even though we're having this on a virtual platform. So allow me to walk you through this virtual event platform for a minute, just show you how it works and how interactive it can be. So here on Hopin, you can navigate between different stages, and we encourage you to make use of the exciting and innovative opportunities and features, including the event chat. And that is located on the right-hand side of your screen. So there you can meet and greet and say hello to all other fellow attendees. Tell us where you are from. Tell us what your expectations are of this great event that we've got here today. Now, of course, we've got a wide-reaching audience, not just here across the continent, but globally as well. We have gathered together a global community of stakeholders. And so you can then get into some greater and deeper conversations in the chat section. And you can also actually go some, a little bit more in depth. And you can do this in the content studios. You also get an opportunity to vote on questions in the polls. And more importantly, you can even connect directly with attendees. And for that, you will go to the networking and people features. And don't forget, above everything else, we encourage you to share some of the great outtakes that you will be seeing and receiving here. Feel free to share them with many others who are not here on our social media platforms. Remember to use the hashtag #UnitingBusiness. So the event this year is coming off, of course, on the back of what we feel has been a great achievement at the United Nations Global Compact, and that is the launch of the United Nations Global Compact Africa Strategy for 2021 2023. So this is a critical roadmap for the strengthening of sustainable businesses in the region, and it focuses, of course, on the African businesses and the ambition for many on the continent to accelerate towards sustainability, making use of the 10 principles. And so we're looking to unlock all of these opportunities through such opportunities such as the African Continental Free Trade Area, the 2030 Agenda, and of course, the Agenda 2063, not forgetting the very important role that is played by the SME sector. And they do this through entrepreneurship, innovation, and technology. So of course, this season, we're going to be bringing together key leaders of the African private sector, the government, and the United Nations to discuss some of those opportunities, as well as the challenges for responsible business, for sustainable investments, and for public and private cooperation in Africa, which we know has taken us forward in many ways. So in today's session, you're going to hear from a panel of financial leaders who are important, and we'll be talking about the role of investment, unlocking capital. We'll be understanding what their risks are and trying to see how to de-risk the investments so as to be able to drive some long-term business benefits on the continent. Of course, in line with the sustainability agenda, we're hoping to prioritize environmental, social governance, that is ESG, impacting that as an essential part of the investment processes. So, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, it is my honor and pleasure to introduce to you the CEO and the Executive Director of the United Nations Global Compact, Sanda Ojiambo.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to welcome you to Uniting Business Africa and to introduce the UN Global Compact's new Africa strategy. But first, allow me to reflect on the emergence just last week of Omicron, a new COVID-19 variant, and what it has already meant for so many African countries. Like the Secretary General of the United Nations has said, I commend the government and the science and health community of South Africa for acting early to identify the emergence of this new variant. But I'm also deeply concerned about the isolation of Southern African countries due to new hastily imposed COVID-19 travel restrictions. As the Secretary General of the United Nations and the Director General of the World Health Organization have long warned, low vaccine rates are a breeding ground for variants. The people of Africa cannot be blamed for the immorally low level of vaccinations available on our continent, and they should not be penalized for identifying and sharing crucial science and health information with the world. So let me add my voice to the Secretary Generals by appealing to all governments to consider repeated testing for travelers, together with other appropriate and truly effective measures, with the objective of avoiding the risk of transmission so as to allow for travel and economic engagement. COVID notwithstanding and looking to the future, our agenda today must respond to the incredible opportunity that African nations hold for the business sector. With 1.3 billion people and a combined GDP of $3.5 trillion, Africa is the world's biggest growth market. It is youthful, geographically vast, culturally diverse, and resource-rich. Now more than ever, African businesses are primed to play a pivotal role in the corporate sustainability movement. Together, we can realize the aspirations for a prosperous, thriving, and resilient Africa. We have an ambitious agenda with business at the core, including small and medium-sized enterprises, as well as large multinational corporations. Our Africa strategy emphasizes the 10 principles of the UN Global Compact. We believe that weaving in protection for the environment, labor, human rights, and anti-corruption measures will drive competitive advantage and commercial success for all businesses. The private sector plays a crucial role in securing the vision that we have for Africa. But to secure this goal, everyone must play their part. Businesses need to work in collaboration with trade associations, financial institutions, governments, civil society, and UN partners. Collaboration is key. The UN Global Compact's Africa Strategy 2021 to 2023 is guided by 3 interlocking objectives. First, to grow the UN Global Compact's impact through focus. Focus on the issues and programs that are most relevant to African companies. Focus to ensure the leading Pan-African and national companies participate,
and focus on the geographic reach of our local networks. Second, to drive inclusive impact. Inclusion of all companies, large and small. Inclusion of all geographies, far and wide. Inclusion of all sectors, emerging and legacy. And third, to leverage associations, supply chains, and sources of capital. Associations for their collective affiliations, supply chains for their holistic coverage of value creation, and sources of capital for their power to influence good practice. Our strategy places the 10 principles, our DNA, at the core. Our work in Africa will focus on advancing these principles. They are the vehicle that can drive change and enhance business resilience. Given Africa's unique context, we have developed a strategic offering that focuses on the issues that are most relevant to businesses in Africa. And expressed through the lens of the Sustainable Development Goals, these issues include gender equity, decent work and economic growth, climate action, peace, justice, and strong institutions, and partnerships. Our programs will focus on these areas through which we will enable the private sector to be profitable while also helping to reduce poverty and hunger and boosting health and education. We will continue to engage businesses across Africa, regardless of their sector, size, or geographic location. To give legs to our Africa strategy, we're establishing a regional hub in Nigeria and will expand the number of Global Compact local networks across the continent. Our local networks will be equipped to create richer experiences for our business participants, foster partnerships with key actors, and promote policy engagement on a local and national level. This approach will help ensure that our efforts speak to the African context and fully support a healthy private sector. I'm particularly thankful to the numerous stakeholders who have informed our Africa strategy. Businesses, multinational companies, the participants of our 10 African local networks, the Global Compact's government group, and many others. Our strategy is a call to action for businesses in Africa. We invite the private sector across the continent to step up and become strong pillars of sustainability and responsible business. Let us fight to overcome the challenges thrown at us by the pandemic and jointly raise our ambitions on what the private sector can collectively achieve. Africa's future is well worth the investment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Oyema, for those opening remarks. And I certainly echo your sentiment of concern and support for our Southern African neighbors as we continue to learn more about the new COVID variant, Omicron, and to just continue to emphasize the fact that no country that goes out of its way to make sure that they're sharing information on the COVID pandemic seemingly gets punished by the rest of the world. And it's certainly important for us to continue to move together on the sustainability journey, even with some of the hurdles and the challenges that the COVID-19 pandemic has brought on, not just on the African continent, but for the world as a whole. It is now my great pleasure to welcome His Excellency, Dr. Mokgweetsi Masisi, who's the President of Botswana, followed by remarks from Ms. Amina Mohammed, who's the Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations.
Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, my sincere appreciation goes to the United Nations Global Compact for convening this virtual forum on mobilizing African business for impact and for bringing us together to discuss the Global Compact's new Africa strategy and what it means to the continent. The vision of the African strategy is to accelerate collective impact of business across the continent by upholding the 10 principles and delivering the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and its Sustainable Development Goals, as well as the African Union's Agenda 2063 through accountable companies and ecosystems that facilitate change. African economies are still reeling from the impact of the heavy blow inflicted by the unparalleled scale of the COVID-19 pandemic. For small economies in particular, pre-existing challenges have worsened on economic mainstays such as trade, tourism, and the extractive industry. This undermines our ability to implement the 2030 Agenda and its SDGs. Unfortunately, it is the most vulnerable in our societies who run the risk of being left furthest behind. The Africa strategy will provide resources for businesses to build back better after the pandemic by aligning their business models with the 10 principles and enabling the expansion of SDG-aligned corporate projects. The Global Compact has the ambition to drive inclusive impact in Africa and has designated Botswana among several countries for the first phase of its expansion goals in 2021-2022. We reiterate our firm partnership support to this expansion plan, and we are happy in our partnership with the United Nations Development Programme Resident Coordinator, Botswana, and Business Botswana for the establishment of a United Nations Global Impact local network in the country. In Botswana, realizing the scale of disruption occasioned by the pandemic, the government of Botswana introduced a reset agenda comprising 5 priorities that are well aligned with the objectives of the Africa strategy. Firstly, a commitment to save Botswana's population from COVID-19 through health programs that include vaccination. Secondly, reforming the public service to ensure effective implementation of government's policies. Thirdly, accelerating digitization in the delivery of government services and creating an enabling environment for the active involvement of the private sector and the public in the uptake and utilization of digital technologies. Fourthly, promoting value chain development to unlock additional value in key sectors such as mining, tourism, agriculture, and education by way of innovation and creativity of our people, especially the youth. Finally, through changing mindsets, our aim is to inspire people to own the national development agenda. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, in concluding my remarks, let me reaffirm Botswana's abiding faith in the 10 principles of the United Nations Global Compact and our unflinching support for the Africa strategy. We are also committed to implementing various multilateral instruments, including Agendas 2030 and 2063, and other protocols calling for universal access to education, quality healthcare, food, rights of people with disabilities, women and children, as well as creating adequate opportunities for the youth. I thank you most sincerely for your attention.
For convening this event on Uniting Business Africa, bringing us together today to discuss the Global Compact strategy for the region and the critical role of the private sector to drive progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals across Africa. With over 1.3 billion people and a combined GDP of over $3 trillion, the African Continental Free Trade Area is poised to become one of the world's fastest growing and most dynamic markets. As economies on the continent recover from the COVID-19 pandemic, there are critical opportunities in energy transitions, in transforming food systems, and in leveraging the wealth of extractive industries toward a green, sustainable, and inclusive economy, leaving no one behind. The Just Energy Transition Partnership in South Africa is a recent example of innovative, ambitious, public-private sector action. Similar opportunities abound across the continent, as forecasts indicate that Africa could double its energy demand by 2040. These opportunities are not only good for business, they are also the investments that we need to get back on track towards the decade of action with the 2030 Agenda and Agenda 2063 at its core. The private sector must play its part to accelerate progress by aligning its expertise and capital with the Sustainable Development Goals. As called for by the Secretary-General's report on our common agenda, we need to boost partnerships, systematically engaging the private sector while strengthening accountability. The UN Global Compact's Africa strategy will help companies to align their business models with its 10 principles, covering human rights, labor, the environment, and anti-corruption. It will be guided by 3 interlocking objectives: to grow the UN Global Compact by focusing on the issues most relevant to African companies, to drive inclusive impact welcoming all businesses regardless of sector or size, to amplify impact by leveraging associations, supply chains, and sources of capital. To achieve these objectives, the UN Global Compact is establishing an Africa hub in Abuja, Nigeria, to support local networks across the continent, serve as a basis for membership growth, and deliver tailored programs for African participants. By working together with business, governments, regional authorities, and the African Union, we can and must make the 2030 Agenda and Agenda 2063 a reality for Africa. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I welcome everyone to this high panel level Q&A section as part of the Uniting Business Africa Virtual Forum. My name is Ya Ampuma Boache. I work at the International Finance Corporation as an investment officer, and I'll be moderating this panel today. The forum actually aims to present the Global Compact Africa Strategy 2021 through 2023, and to build collaboration with African leaders and other stakeholders, including businesses and civil society, to advance the strategic objectives of the Global Compact Africa Strategy. The strategy focuses on three main pillars. The first one is grow impact through focus. The second is drive inclusive impact. And the third is to leverage supply chain and sources of capital. This panel will focus on the third pillar, which is leveraging supply chain and sources of capital to advance sustainability and also mainstreaming of the 10 principles of the Global Compact Africa. I will now move ahead and introduce the speakers for this panel. Let me turn to Dr. Fanny Luthier. Dr. Fanny Luthier is the Chief Executive Officer and also a partner for Southbridge Investments. She also was previously the Chief of Staff to the President and Vice President at the World Bank Group and Senior Vice President at the African Development Bank. Dr. Luthier, please go ahead and introduce yourself to the audience. It's a pleasure having you on this panel.
Thank you very much, Ms. Boache. It's a real pleasure to be here, particularly now, because I think the 10 principles and the role of business has been much important for the transformation that we're about to see in Africa, and also looking at what has been happening previously. So you've already introduced who I am, so I'm not going to say much more than that, other than to say I was born and raised in Tanzania and have traveled and worked across all the main regions of the world, and have in the last decade been focusing on Africa. And it's a real pleasure to be here to talk about these supply chain issues and sources of capital to unlock delivery of the Sustainable Development Goals through the role of business and the investment community. And thank you for having me on this panel.
Thank you for the brief introduction. I will now turn to Mr. Scott Mather, who is the Chief Investment Officer and Managing Director for PIMCO. Mr. Mather also oversees the firm's global ESG portfolio integration and sustainable investment activities. Please go ahead and briefly introduce yourself to the audience. It's a pleasure having you on this panel as well.
Well, thank you. My pleasure to be here. I'm Scott Mather, and Chief Investment Officer, headquartered in our headquarters in California in the US, but have spent a lot of my career for PIMCO and managing our offices and working in different offices around the world. And I head up our global sustainability efforts, so I still have a high degree of connectivity across our platform. And for those who don't know, we manage about $2.2 trillion on behalf of all types of clients, institutional clients and retail clients, and all different types of strategies around the world. So pleasure to be with you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction. I will now move on to our next speaker on the panel, who is Mr. Jason Lamene, the founder and CEO of Lennox Park Solutions, Inc. He also has been an active partner to the Global Compact since 2009. I would now like for you to introduce yourself to the audience. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Ms. Boache. It's terrific to be here. Thank you for having me. So my background is in investment banking and investment management. I'm a co-founder and CEO of Lennox Park Solutions. We're a fintech company, and we build and develop software, both collaborative software and data analytics software for the asset management industry primarily. Africa is near and dear to my heart. I'm Sierra Leonean, born there and lived there until I was 13 years old before moving back to the United States with my mother, who was a Peace Corps volunteer in the 60s. So I'm delighted to be here and participate.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lamene. May I introduce to you Mr. Oskar Oyema, who is the Managing Director and the Chief Executive Officer of the Nigerian Exchange Group PLC. Mr. Oyema, it's a pleasure having you on this discussion. Please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thank you very much, yeah. My name is Oskar Oyema. I'm the Group Managing Director and CEO of Nigerian Exchange Group PLC, which recently demutualized, and became an entity that is for profit and that is listed on the Nigerian Exchange Limited.
Thank you very much for this brief introduction. Mr. Oyema, my question to you is that in recent years, we've seen investors have shown great interest in supporting, in providing financing for sustainability. And usually in finance world, the way they will show their interest in sustainability projects is to stipulate how the capital they are providing will be used in such projects and the conditions and in which conditions that the funding should be used. In what ways or other ways do you think investors can increase their participation in sustainability? And more specifically, looking at the 10 principles of the Global Compact Africa strategy, in what way can they even promote that?
Let me use the institution which I run as an example of an investor, since we're a non-operating holding company with several operating subsidiaries and associate companies. We continue to invest in other companies across the entire capital market infrastructure value chain. The way we approach sustainability is through 4 dimensions of the marketplace, workplace, community, and the environment. And we believe that our approach actually aligns with the UN Global Compact 10 principles and the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So the NGX Group as a listed entity is fully committed to upholding the highest governance standards. We have a history of transparency through our sustainability reporting, financial reporting, and sustainability framework that has been embedded in everything that we do. Therefore, the principles of the UN Global Compact are actually things that have become a way of life for us, and even the way we view potential investments. We typically want to make sure that we're adding value to the ecosystem, if you will, and that ecosystem players not only taking value, but also giving back value such that the ecosystem can continue to grow. For example, gender equality remains a priority as we push for business success with enabling policies, healthy work environments, and initiatives that allow women to thrive. Our diversity and inclusiveness are reflected by a gender-balanced workforce that reflects national ethnic spread. If you look at our operating exchange itself, it really provides a marketplace that facilitates sustainability. For example, it has in place rules around governance, rules around sustainability reporting, and the like. And we also have products that have been created to facilitate investments from both the private sector and the public sector, such as the green bonds, the Sharia compliant products such as the Sukuk bonds. These bonds, to your earlier point, actually, in order for them to qualify, have to meet certain filtering requirements. If you take the green bonds, those bonds are actually directed at projects. The use of proceeds, highly transparent, directed at projects that reduce carbon emission. And so we've actually facilitated financing of projects directed at arresting deforestation, projects directed at providing roads to areas that would not otherwise have financing for such types of roads, transportation, and other types of projects. So the operating exchange is actually very much alive to its duty as a platform provider that facilitates responsible investments into various aspects of the economy. Another subsidiary that we have is a regulation company, NGX Regulation, which is committed to promoting just and equitable principles of trade and sound business practices in the Nigerian capital market. And they do this by strictly enforcing the exchange's listings and trading rules in accordance with global best practice. So there again, from a regulatory perspective, you have an entity that is working to make sure that there is a fair and orderly markets, and that these markets continue to foster some of the principles of the UN Global Compact. For example, they administer the corporate governance rating system, which is designed to enhance governance within each listed company. So I think with some of these examples, I can assure you that the NGX group is confident that this policy, this Africa strategy that the UN Global Compact is launching is the right one. And we're very much aligned as we look to improve our footprint across the entire continent and to work with partners to broaden horizons and create wealth and sustainable private sector businesses in order to continue to create a clearer path for the development of African markets.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. Now I want to zoom in into green bonds, sustainable bonds, Sukuks, and some of the others, other ESG linked bonds that we've seen in the market. So are you helping the companies that are listed and are interested in issuing some of these bonds? Are you helping them to develop an approach to issuing these bonds, or you're just focusing on the developing the framework to allow these companies to issue the bonds? And then generally, for instance, when you take for instance, green covered bonds, we've seen in the market that there's oversubscription, generally like 1.3 times oversubscription of covered bonds, green covered bonds than regular covered bonds. Are you seeing that level of interest within the African context, and especially in Nigeria, when you see like how some of these sustainable bonds, are you seeing that level of interest and oversubscription of those bonds?
So our operating exchange has a philosophy to handhold and work with potential issuers throughout the entire life cycle of that issuance. So if you take green bonds, we've actually done training with partners to help the market ecosystem understand how green bonds work, where they can be applied, and the characteristics and things like that, as well as pricing. Not only for potential issuers, but also for investors and general market participants. We've also worked with the market in creating the rules around green bond issuances, not only the market, but also international players, including the United Nations. They do that. They handhold and they work, and there's a proven path for both government green bond issuance and corporate bond issuance. The exchange has also partnered with international exchanges, such as the Luxembourg exchange, for example, which is the largest green bond listing platform in the world, to have dual listing capabilities, because, as you know, there are dedicated funds to sustainability investments, responsible investing, and things like that. Those funds need to get to Africa. Increasingly, those funds are not getting to Africa. And in fact, as you mentioned, a lot of green bonds have oversubscription. We need to see more of that in Africa. And so plugging into the global or the mainstream flows of capital is very important. And we felt that by partnering with some of the exchanges where these bonds are listed, we can create dual listing opportunities and therefore unlock some of those flows. If we look at the green bonds that have been listed in the Nigerian markets, both corporate and government, the capital raising targets were met, and pricing was efficient as well, but not at the same level as what you will see in the global markets. And so it's still work in progress.
Thank you very much, Mr. Oyema. I think this is very insightful information from you. And also, I think it's very interesting to know that you are a partner to the Global Compact's Africa strategy. I think this is a good initiative to see more sustainability financing going into Africa. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ian.
So before we begin our Q&A section, I think there's a need to put some context as to why this is important, and having this discussion in Africa is very important, right? I think we've had a lot of conversations, interest in recent years about sustainability finance. I think a lot of investors are very interested in investing more, providing financing for sustainability projects. However, Africa, to begin with, does not receive enough capital. When you look at the FDI flows to Africa compared to other regions, developed countries, Africa is disproportionate. So you look at, for instance, in 2009, the flow of FDI to Africa was only, I believe, 45 billion compared to, let's say, developed countries that receive 800 billion. You also look at, even compared to other countries, other regions like Latin America and Caribbean that receive 164 billion. So Africa is still, when you compare to even other regions, is received a disproportionate amount of capital coming into the region. And given that Africa is growing, and also looking at the opportunity with COVID pandemic, I think everyone is looking at, every country, every region is looking at green recovery, recovery sustainably. And so I think this discussion is at the right time. So let's move on to the discussion, the Q&As. I think given this context, that there's a need for Africa to receive more capital to support these areas. So I will begin with Mr. Martha. And I saw what recently, the work you did in South Africa, launching the first renewable energy bond with South Africa Development Bank. And that's, I think, a good example of how investors can support sustainability and the mainstreaming of the 10 principles. So can you please tell me how can sustainable business practices result in the meaningful de-risking of projects in Africa?
Well, thank you. That was a good example of the type of transactions that we're hoping through some of the work of this Global Compact initiative, we can do a lot more of. And, you know, it's the belief of ourselves and so many investors that we work with that this, the sustainability of business is a way to de-risk their portfolios. And it's a way to identify the winners of tomorrow. And so it's exciting to see what's going on with this initiative in Africa. There's, obviously Africa will be the fastest growing continent for as far as the eye can see, but it will be even faster and more resilient with the focus on sustainability. And for us, it's and increasingly for so many investors, it's a must-have because we have so many unknown challenges that we face, whether it's respect to climate or the environment or water or particular crises like the current one that we're going through with COVID, that a focus on sustainability can create companies that think about the wide range of scenarios, and they can respond better in times of crisis. And importantly, they can attract more capital, right? Mm-hmm. And to be able to attract more capital at a lower price, and especially in a time of crisis, is absolutely critical. And so that's where we think, the role here of the Global Compact is really important. And, the focus on the 10 principles, the focus on, having companies be able to present their business with respect to those 10 principles and demonstrating as much as they can through the Global Compact that interconnectedness to the world of sustainability will be particularly important. And, one hope that we have is that many businesses and countries in Africa can sort of leapfrog the development path with respect to sustainability, use sustainability as a source of value creation, a way of attracting capital, because there's so much global capital that wants to seek out those kind of opportunities. So there's a big chance here that Africa can leapfrog in many industries, everything, especially from energy, which is so important, the way the rest of the world has developed, and do it much more quickly. And so that's why we're really excited about this initiative.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. I think you make a valid point about using sustainability as value creation. Now, my question is, when you look at investments and how investors price projects, do you think enough premium is built into sustainable projects?
Well, I would say, it's sometimes very difficult to tell. Obviously, in the repeat issuers in the developed world, you do see a small premium, a lower borrowing cost. But more importantly, what I think it does is it brings in a diverse set of investors, and eventually, especially for some of the private opportunities and even for sovereigns in Africa that have a well-developed focus on sustainability, it should lower their overall borrowing cost, even if there isn't a particular project involved. Now, to the extent that projects can be really clearly defined in terms of sustainability, there's no question in my mind that that's going to result in a lower cost of capital and bring in investments. For instance, the investment that we did of over 3 billion rand, as you mentioned, with the Development Bank of South Africa, we probably couldn't have gotten there, and certainly not in the size we did, unless we had that focus on the sustainability aspects of it. But there's a lot of institutional investors that we represent that really are looking for ways like to push their portfolios in that direction. So what they need is a well-diversified set of opportunities, and then that capital will flow more easily. So that's our big hope and what can be achieved here.
Yeah, thank you very much. Ms. Luthier, I think given your experience at the bank, any kind of comments on what Mr. Marker has already expressed on how investors view sustainability projects and the type of premium that is built into pricing?
Well, first, let me join you in congratulating PIMCO for that amazing work you've done in renewable energy with the Development Bank of Southern Africa. I think it's a great opportunity to show how with innovation you can crowd in investments in those areas. And I think what we see every day in my work at Southbridge Investments and taking from my experience at the World Bank and the African Development Bank are three things. First, countries that are able to package their projects, pipelines in a manner that explicitly talks about sustainability are able to attract very, very important improvements in the cost of capital. So you take the example of Benin, which recently raised a social bond, and they got a historically low interest for that bond, and therefore they are able to pass on those savings from raising capital at a cheaper cost to the projects that they have to put in place to meet some of the important sustainable development goals. Similarly, in the case of Rwanda, which recently went to the market also with a pipeline that is targeted towards climate action and sustainability. So I think the markets have proven that in Africa, when they get a pipeline that looks that it's going to deliver on sustainability, that they come in with the right pricing. The second thing I think that is really critical is being able to actually deliver a solid pipeline, because a lot of investors are chasing very, very few deals. And therefore, the more you can create a pipeline that is sustainable and investable, the better you are. So what's working in that regard? One is when you have project preparation facilities that support companies and countries to become investment ready, to have projects that are investment ready because they have all the financials already worked out, their projections on future demand and future markets. You already have the identification of how delivery is going to be done, what kind of companies are lined up to do the construction phase, and then there are de-risking solutions that are brought to bear so that the market can take up the rest. When you have that in place, again, you have very successful attraction of investors. And then the third piece, I think, which is equally important, is being able to tell stories and through reporting show that you're actually delivering sustainable results. Because investors also want to be shown that the efforts that they took to maybe accept a lower level of profit is being rewarded by a high level of impact. But that has to be credible, it has to be visible, and it has to be verifiable. So I think if you have these three things in place, you can attract investments. And I believe the focus on renewable energy, which has been quite successful across Africa, has come about because it is easier in the energy sector to actually show that whole chain, because you can deliver the solution, you can measure how many people have access to clean energy, and you can also show the track record in bringing those solutions to a large number of companies and individuals, and therefore the benefit is quite straightforward to show. The challenge is for us now to do this for the other SDGs, like in agribusiness, for the ending poverty and zero hunger sustainable development goal. Or when you look at water and sanitation, which are amongst the hardest sectors to attract investment in, how to bundle those effectively with public-private partnerships so that you can deliver a stream of value. And similarly, when you look at the investments in transforming the transport fleets, for instance, to make them more carbon friendly or reducing the carbon footprint of manufacturing, those require standards. And once you have them in place and you can report on those improvements, investors can come in. So I think business has a big role to play, because it's by showing that this can be done and by behaving following the 10 principles that indicates to the investors that when you put your money with a lower expectation of return, you have a higher impact. But also those businesses that put together investment profiles that are sustainable many times do that because they are highly innovative, they're looking at new technologies and new markets, and sometimes they are the ones that also deliver the bigger returns.
Thank you very much. That's a very comprehensive comment. And I think it leads into the next question that I had, which is whether it is possible to develop a truly bankable African projects based on sustainable development goals and the 10 principles. And I'll give an example. For instance, in my work at IFC, we will typically, I think when we want to do a green bond or any social bond, those type of ESG bonds, we will actually work with the clients and help them hold their hands to kind of create the assets, right? Identify the assets and be able to, based on their eligibility, allow the clients to create more assets in the pipeline. Now, how can this kind of work be done at a, how do you call it, increased level, at a level that will create more projects, larger pipeline for investors to participate in such projects?
Yes, I think the example you gave of the IFC, and I see a lot of the really innovative work you're doing with the upstream efforts that IFC is taking that really bring along investments that otherwise would have never seen the light. So I think that is really commendable, and I have observed a huge change as a result of that approach. So what can one do more to bring those kind of solutions? I think the first one is to look at the small and medium enterprises. In Africa, they make up 90% of what we call the private sector. So if you want to have a solution that includes the private sector, you cannot avoid looking at small and medium enterprises in Africa. And second, I think having pools of capital that can stretch from the pre-feasibility all the way to bringing those investments online are needed, because if you can allay through de-risking by having, say, grant money go to support those early stages of project development, supporting companies to put their ideas in a way that they can be investable even in phases, and then coming in then and layering the capital according to the risk appetite of the investors, those kind of solutions bring about really transformational change. I'll give a quick example. We helped a country recently to attract quite important private investments to build on their and improve their supply chain, taking agricultural products, transforming them to deliver from cotton to textile and garments, all the way to exporting them through the ports. So that whole supply chain that links agriculture to manufacturing, to logistics and transport, and eventually to trade and export are important. So how do you get that going? In this case, the government came in, provided the de-risking that was necessary to attract private investment, securing the land, supporting through all the energy solutions, wastewater treatment and so on, giving the licensing that is needed for the private investor to operate across multiple geographical zones and link up to the neighboring countries, and aligning to other infrastructure investments, the roads, the railways, the ports, and so on. And that allowed unlocking a huge amount of capital that came in from private investment and didn't need any subsidizing because it was able to be invested in the right manner. And then the last thing I would say, which is really important, is thinking ahead around the third and fourth investments. There's very little of a secondary market in Africa. So if you are a company and you go out there and you take a risk, you are able to attract financing and you get your investment going. When those investors want to exit, there is not much around that allows them to exit and therefore crowd in more capital and have them invest in other opportunities that are requiring this form of either venture capital or early de-risking. And I think this lack of a space where you can crowd in other types of investors to take on the growth and scaling part of what has been either a venture level of investment. So from venture capital to growth capital, that transition is not very smooth in the case of Africa. We have to build all those markets and create those secondary opportunities for exit, help structure and design investment profiles that allow exit in different forms, so that becomes easier over time, and then investors can feel comfortable to be there either more patiently for those that can wait and to be able to exit for those that have to. And this is work, I think, that is ongoing and which will deliver results, I think, in the coming years when we see the track record, that's what's happening on the ground.
Thank you very much. And, Mr. Lamene, I think we can, this is a good segue to move into, based on your background, and how do you think we can leverage technology? I think Ms. Luthier talks about, transitioning from, venture phase to growth stage. And I mean, part of it is also, I think, investment financing, but part of it is also technology. So in your experience, how can we leverage technology to advance sustainability on the continent, and also the 10 principles?
Sure. Well, thank you for the question. You know, technology has a really powerful and awesome way of leveling the playing field. And there are a few different ways that we're helping some of our allocating clients here in the United States, which in total now we've got about 5.3 trillion of asset owners that use our technology systems for one thing or another. In listening to Ms. Luthier and Mr. Mather talk about their experiences, it affirms to me the importance of better, more efficient collaboration around decision makers. And we've seen this work time and time again. I think intuitively it makes sense to us, but we've also put some scientific polling behind it. And it's overwhelmingly decision makers and allocators of capital tend to find their best ideas from their peer networks. And so when we stepped back and started building collaborative software, it was centered on that thesis. And so as I think about what's happening in Africa and the incredible investment opportunity and the credible investors and allocators that are in that market, I think there could be a lot more collaboration with peer groups here in the West. And I think more collaboration with allocators, whether it's sovereign wealth funds or pension funds on the continent in Africa, and looking where they're deploying capital. So I think collaboration can be significantly more efficient, and you can use technology to have filtering that makes sense so that the pipeline of credible and vetted deals and investments really is more readily available. I think another thing that I wanted to mention is the importance of data and analytics and metrics, accountability measures. You know, the saying goes, nothing gets managed if it isn't being measured. And I, again, want to echo Ms. Luthier's comments and commend PIMCO for the work and the intentionality. But that happens when there are metrics and data and robust sets of analytics that inform those decisions. So I think coming up with standards on what types of metrics and accountability measures should be in place and generally accepted is a big part of the equation. But this is tricky because usually when I say something like that, the immediate reaction is, what can countries in Africa do better? What can companies in Africa do better? It's very easy sometimes to look out and say, this is what needs to happen to the countries and the issuers and the originators. But a lot of times the allocators have not sufficiently prepared their business to attract investments in that way. If I can just make a very quick analogy, one of the areas where we've made the most progress with respect to our analytics and that we service for our clients is around gender equity. And this is actually, it's really interesting when you stop and look at an industry, asset management, that is inherently performed very poorly with respect to representation of women and people of color in leadership, across the ranks, on boards. We know what the numbers are. But when it comes to really making a tangible impact, you have to look at the apparatus through which the decisions are being made, not just the pipeline of women. I think most people that have studied the issue know that the pipeline is just fine. What is different is the sourcing and how to attract women and how to include them in an organization and how to maintain and keep them in an organization. And so we started looking at certain things like 1.3% of the potentially $80 trillion asset management market was managed by women and people of color. That's an astonishingly low number. But when you actually start looking at the way the decisions to allocate are made, it's not that surprising. If you have, for instance, that before you allocate to a woman-owned or woman-led asset management firm, that she must have a 5-year portable track record. There's just not that many women in the industry because they haven't been participating in the industry for long enough to be able to have that kind of track record. So unless you change the inputs through which you are making these decisions, the output won't be different. So I like to sort of make that point in that it's easy to point to what the countries need to do and what the companies need to do. And yes, there's work that needs to be done. But there's also a lot of reflection that needs to happen on the decision makers and the allocators of capital.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That is a very interesting point. And I'm just even thinking about the work that we do at IFC, how some of these data analytics has actually helped us to, to make a case to clients as to the value add for instance, issuing a gender bond or a social bond. So obviously, I think data analytics is very important, and how that is incorporated into the decision-making of the companies is very relevant in how financiers see the company and how they want to allocate capital to that particular company. Now, Mr. Marta, I think this is a good way to sort of bring in capital markets, right? How, for instance, when you look at capital markets, I think, of course, when we talk about Africa, part of how we are able to drive, capital to Africa will be the development of capital markets. And with that, I think there's an opportunity to also incorporate some of the metrics of corporate sustainability. So in your view, how can we efficiently, or in what ways can we integrate some of the metrics of corporate sustainability into Africa and global capital markets?
Yeah, that's of course a growing area where, as investors, everybody wants more and more and more information, but it's getting better and better. And I think just, when you look at some of the standard setters, when you look at maybe it's the TCFD in terms of stress testing businesses for climate, and there's a myriad of examples that are published there in terms of frameworks that issuers, be they sovereign or be they corporate, can think about in terms of describing what they're doing. They can basically pull examples in from a diverse set of issuers, many of which hopefully look somewhat like they do. And so it's initiatives like that we think are very helpful, as well as a host of other examples can be found in the UN Global Compact and guidance that's given there, and it continues to broaden and deepen. And it's really a way for, I think, for people to learn from one another, and that's one of the things that's really been an exciting development to see in the last 2 or 3 years. If you go back 4 or 5 years ago, it was very valid to say, well, where should I begin? Because I just don't know where to start. But there's been such a growth in the guidance and the examples put out there that, what we always encourage issuers to do is say, well, reach out to some of these platforms, be it the Global Compact or the PRI or TCFD, and there's people there if you're looking to get started. And then importantly, just don't let perfection be the enemy of the good. Nobody's expecting somebody who's just beginning to describe what they're doing with sustainability to deliver the same sort of information that somebody that's been doing it for 10 years has been doing. So, it's just a start, and we think it's helpful for investors. And I just want to go back to this point. That's where this idea of, and where hopefully this initiative leads to a lot of more collaborative dialogue, both within different circles. And that's how we'll get more investment activity. And that's how issuers in Africa will attract more capital. By thinking innovatively about how they can work, yes, it goes to countries kind of defining their roadmaps and trying to find ways to connect investors. That's important, but also, multilateral development banks and their big role to play, and describing how they can bring in the private sector and providing examples, and that guidance, that technical assistance is really critical. So, we think this initiative, SDG number 17 shouldn't be forgotten, which is just partnership. And there's so many ways to partner to bring forward more investment that's aligned with sustainability in Africa. That's a really exciting time.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I'm very conscious of the time. So I think I will have my final question to Ms. Lucia, and then we can just summarize all the relevant points from our discussion. So Ms. Lucia, if you can please address this question: how can we, through the Africa strategy, create a meeting place that allows investors and providers of capital to meaningfully interact with Africa businesses, including SMEs, such that incentives and rewards for sustainable behaviors are provided to both sides, right? How do you, I think incentives is always very important. The investors need to be incented, and then so are the companies, they need to be incented too. So how can you align these incentives?
Thank you very much for that question. I think, first of all, there are so many forums right now that are focused on investment. You have the Africa Investment Forum led by the African Development Bank. You have the Super Return Africa, which brings all the private equity players interested in Africa. You have AFSIC that just had their meeting in London a few weeks ago. You have the CEO Forum that's done by Jeune Afrique. So there are many forums that allow companies to meet with investors and to share ideas, and many of them result in investment at the end of the day. However, as I mentioned earlier, this leaves out small and medium enterprises. It leaves out women, as Mr. Lamene has mentioned, because usually they are not part of that crowd, or because to go to Super Return Africa, for example, you have to show that you are managing a portfolio already, that you have a track record. Otherwise, you can't even register. So it's a huge bottleneck for women and others who are not already in that space. So I think that is something that could be improved to make sure that those meetings are inclusive, and to find a space where they can be invited to participate even if they don't have the requisite track record. The second incentive, I think, is if they can really be a combination of those who can de-risk, who come at the same time as those who are looking to take risk. Because usually these conversations are happening in different spaces and they're not all aligned. And then I think a final area would be to make sure that those who come to those meetings are really bringing investable ideas. Because a lot of the times when you go to those meetings and you're meeting with either people who are presenting their deals or investors who are coming to shop for deals, there isn't a complete matching of the opportunities with the capital, and having a better preparation that allows the two groups to come together with really well thought out ideas, and the matching of the investable capital with investable projects, I think needs to take place as well. And I'll comment on maybe one quick thing on the capital market side, because I think this is another opportunity where incentives can be embedded. Recently, the East African countries of Kenya, Rwanda, and Burundi merged their capital markets so that they could give a degree of scale. And that opportunity then gives a chance for small companies to list in those local markets, and then they become visible to the global audience. And when you then look at the kind of investors who come and they aggregate smaller companies and create these big value chains, they're able then to raise the investable capital to a higher level that attracts even bigger investors. And I think with the point made by Lamene, Mr. Lamene, on standards and being able to publish those and report on standards, the matching of these value chains of investment with standards of reporting could then unlock even more capital going forward, because investors then are assured that their investments are going for the intended purposes and that they're delivering a value chain of impact and financial returns. So I think if we do those, the incentives will be aligned.
Thank you very much. And as a final comment, Mr. Lamene, I think since you've been part of the Global Compact since 2009, I think I wonder whether you can give your view in terms of promoting the sustainable business and mainstreaming of the 10 principles to support the new strategy that they've put in place, the 2021-2023? How can they advance that strategy on the continent? I mean, I think the goal is to get as many people, as many companies, right? Reach is very important. If you can get many companies to integrate the principles into their operations, that would be a good, how do you call it, development for the continent. So in your view, how can we promote that on the continent?
Well, it's been my pleasure to participate. So I want to express my appreciation and gratitude for being able to contribute. You know, I go back to accountability, and I think most change comes about when there are accountable measures put in place and people and decision makers are held to account. And so, Mr. Mathers, you know, touched on something very important. A lot of times in our industry, we let perfect get in the way of something very good. And a lot of times, and I think investing in Africa is a great example, but the analogy is looking at investing with diverse managers and decision makers here in the US. We study and study and study and research the problem so much, it's almost like we're starting to admire the problem, and we fail to get to the next level, which is, what do we do about it? What do we do about it? How do we hold folks accountable? And so I think, you know, certainly when it comes to investing with diversity in mind and gender equity, the summer of 2020 brought together a lot of underrepresented groups, but, you know, starting here in the US, but it really proliferated all throughout the world for a rejection to discrimination. And I think building on some of that momentum to put in place the expectation that certain things are just, you know, table stakes, really there's an opportunity to do that. So I think, you know, to answer your question more succinctly, we have to get started. We have to do something. And a lot of times the failure to get started comes from the need or desire to have studied it completely, you know, and then come up with the execution strategy. And I'm not saying those things aren't important, but at some point on Monday morning, you have to come in and start doing something. I'm pleased that in the area of diversity and inclusion here in the US, we are starting to see that tangible move now beyond the rhetoric. Because for a long time, you know, all participants and stakeholders would quite happily discuss the problem of diversity, discuss how, you know, diverse teams outperform and the benefits of it. But nobody was going in on Monday morning and actually doing something to structurally change their business or their approach. So I think doing something tangible, even if it's not perfect, and being willing to improvise and evolve over time is a really, really good next step.
Thank you very much, all of you. I think it's been a good conversation this afternoon, and I think the contributions were very insightful. So I thank you, Mr. Lamene. I thank you for Mr. Mather and Ms. Lucia. And I would like to, at this point, just highlight the few points that came out of our conversation, right? So first, I think it is very clear that the countries that are able to build sustainable pipeline are able to raise capital more cheaper than regular projects, right? And so we also mentioned de-risking of investments, right? De-risking is very important to allow sustainability to take place, right? To give incentives to companies to pursue more sustainable projects. So incentives through de-risking is very important. We also talked about crowding in investors and also unlocking potential investors onto the continent through de-risking. And then I think from your point, I think we talked about transition from venture capital to growth capital. I think that is very important, right? Because growth is very important. This is how you are able to, businesses can expand and there'll be more job creation and opportunity to raise more capital on the continent. So businesses cannot remain at the venture level of venture phase. There needs to be room for growth, right? So making that transaction is very important. Then we move on to technology, right? And technology for us, I think it was very interesting. I think Mr. Lamene, you made a good point about efficient collaboration among decision makers. That is very important because that is going to have an impact on capital allocation. Then we had a discussion about the importance of data analytics, because data analytics will also feed into decision making. And then I think what is also very important is we mentioned in sharing ideas, right? Investable ideas during some of these forums and platforms, conversations that we'll have in platforms and forums, because if we do come without investable ideas, then you don't get substantial feedback from investors, right? So having that investable ideas be presented in forums like this is very important. Then we talked about matching of ideas with investable capital. That is also very important, right? So one investor might be looking at social bonds, the other might be looking at green bonds, but you have to be able to do those matching, right? So that those companies and investors can be aligned. And then finally, I think we talked about analytics around gender equity. I think gender is very important. Women, I think, women businesses continue to grow. And on the continent, when you look at SMEs, a lot of SMEs driven by women. So women cannot be forgotten in the equation. So gender equity and building in gender in the sustainability is going to be important in driving the African agenda. So thank you all very much. This was all very useful. I am sure our audience enjoyed our conversation, and have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.